What's good? What's good? What's good? I am Damo, the political plug. This is the Chop Up Show. I'm glad y'all was able to join us for actually, today's Sunday, right? So
Mhm.
I was about to be like, glad y'all was able to join us for another one, but today is Sunday, so glad we able to tap in with y'all on the Sunday to bring y'all some of this information. Uh, I'm here with my best homegirl, Toya G. You see, she got a
What's
new
good?
twist, looking good.
We do what we can. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a echo. I don't know if y'all can hear. Let me know if y'all hear an echo. But anyway, to get into this conversation, today we are talking to y'all about the travel advisory that took place with Ron DeSantis and the state of Florida, along with the NAACP. So what happened on May 20th of this year, the NAACP issued a travel advisory warning black people to stay away from Florida. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
to me, I ain't know that, you know, that was needed. You feel me? Because I do, to be honest, I feel like what? I feel like it obvious, right? It's Florida. I wanted to find something better to say other than obvious, but it's Florida, right? But the NAACP felt the desire to place out a travel advisory wanting black people to stay away from Florida. And the reason why they did it, in their official words, they said that Florida is, and these are the words of the NAACP, Florida is openly hostile towards African Americans, people of color, and LGBTQ plus individuals. Before traveling to Florida, please understand that the state of Florida devalues and marginalizes the contributions of and the challenges faced by African Americans and other communities of color. So they saying straight up, the CRT bans, the attack on wokeness, that is making Florida dangerous for black people to travel to. Now I feel the
Mm-hmm.
way about that. I feel the way about that. I ain't gonna lie to you. But before I go on my
Okay.
rant, Toya, what are your thoughts on the NAACP statement?
I'm interested in it. I feel like they released it, a travel ban on the state of Missouri, which I take personally. Maybe within the last year or so. Um, because of, and I can't really remember why. I want to say it was the frequency of black people being stopped by the police or something like that, right? And so these little flashes of the NAACP's presence on these issues are interesting. I definitely think it's nice to see such a formative and governing body over what
Mm-hmm.
we've known to be civil rights and what we've known to be the push and the cause toward black liberation in this country. But at the same time, I can't help but to find some of these gestures kind of shallow, because where are you in the rest of it? Like, where are you? I want to, NAACP versus the state of Florida lawsuit for stuff with CRT. Like, I mean, maybe I just don't know how things work, but my ultimate point is that I'm interested that they intervened in these moments, because I really don't know what that means. I don't think it's very shallow. That statement doesn't really take a lot of time to give maybe guidance to residents of Florida and tell us how
Mm-hmm.
they should feel. I don't know what to do with it. Like, it's a FYI, but we've been watching the same news you've been watching, so like, I guess thank you, but I don't know what it means, and I don't want to undermine the NAACP as this legendary, historic, organization that has been at the backdrop of so many different evolutions of what we've been as Black people in this country. But in this day and age, I don't know if they need a PR agent or just some rebranding or a conversation, because like, we don't. I like what we need, especially now in the NAACP. We're not getting and haven't been getting. I think in terms of just
Oh
representation,
wow.
like when you think of the Black organization that has led Black people, it's BLM or nothing, right? And I've been trying to figure out for my generation what it might look like for the NAACP to lead and guide some of the very conversations, the very important conversations of these generations and the issues and the topics here, whether it be gun violence in Black communities and how we intracommunally start to deal with and navigate some of those things, whether it be taking
Mm-hmm.
leadership on education, taking
Mm-hmm.
leadership on uh, what am I talking about? The equitable housing or uh, fair income, like just different battles on different fronts. And
that's actually impacting black people. Yeah.
I could be speaking ignorantly, but if I am, as somebody who takes pride in being connected to the infrastructures and the networks and the organizations that look to liberate black people in this day and age, I would know about it. I would have probably heard about if they was really doing some moving and shaking, right? So I don't want to undermine what they doing, but that's why I say they need better PR. They need better representation and better connectivity with the culture because when shit is arising, nobody's like, where it's like, where's John? Nobody's like, where's the NAACP?
Yeah,
I
nah. Nah.
That's the problem.
Agree. I definitely feel like the NAACP has come up majorly short in terms of connecting to the newer generations, or even what is the newer generation's role with the NAACP? Because niggas don't even call themselves colored anymore. So I think that
Yeah.
the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, you know what I mean? Like, if we was really woke, we would be like, well, shouldn't we stop calling ourselves colored too, right? Shouldn't the one, I guess what you would call a lobbying organization for black people, still has colored in it. So that really should reflect like where we are in terms of organizing and the newer generations relationship with the NAACP. But
Here's my thing, and this is I don't want to be overly politically correct, but I think I kind of disagree with even the need to rename and rebrand it that way because I think it speaks to legacy and heritage, which is not bad. A lot of people argue, and it depends on what their interests are, because a lot of people argue all of these people who fighting for our rights supposed to be fighting for our rights want to talk about multicultural and want to overlap, and maybe they can be the governing body or the institution or the entity that solely focuses on the issues of black people. And I think if they were to do that, that would allow for some of the problematic baggage. I mean, nigga is a word that got some historic issues, but we still use it
true,
regardless of
that
the
is true.
various So I mean, all I'm saying is I'm not about potato,
Right,
tomato, tomato in terms of colored people. I say keep it and let it reflect the time and the era in which it emerged as something
right.
necessary and timely for our needs. And I say it can be the organization that satisfies the black people's demand to have organizations that are solely committed and focused on the needs of black people. I'm
Yeah,
fine
but
with
I
that.
mean, well, and shout out to everybody in the chat. C. Dot Hustle in the building, Winter Dragon, my nigga Tyler, Avenge the Ancestors, ARE Radio. Thank y'all for joining us on this Sunday. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, I was like, damn, the chop up live, like, yeah, niggas is really on CP time. We 4 days, like,
yeah.
right? But I kind of agree with you. I mean, I do think that like we do have the ability to change what words mean. So it ain't no real big deal on tripping over like whether it's colored or whatever else, because there's a legacy associated with the organization, right? So in terms of changing the name, I feel that. But at the same time, we don't think that when it comes to Confederate shit. Like we don't think that when it comes to, you know what I mean, like other things related to it. Be that as it may. Be that as it may.
No, I'm not gonna think that about some shit that's oppositional to me. Like, no, I'm not gonna grant
Right.
them that same grace. No, but when
But
it
we
comes to my shit, the shit that I want to be protective over, yeah, I think we should be able. We don't have a tattered, scattered, messed up history that we're trying to cling on to. We're trying to give homage to ancestors, give space and place for the movements that have transformed what we know as socio-political power today. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
but
And
can
yes, I'm the rules cutting different
Yeah. Okay. No.
for us.
And I'll let that. I'll let the rules cut different. I'm cool with that. I just think that
Mhm.
there's something cognitive that we gotta deal with when we don't want to be called colored. Like if a nigga calls you like, yeah, the colored professor told me, you would look at that stuff. Calendar. Let me find a calendar. Let me make sure it's
Yeah, but
not
this is why context matters. You can't
1930.
call me. Yeah, but this is the same reason why that student probably can't call me a nigga, but you can. And we're gonna sit and
Do
deal
you
with
want
like
me to call you colored though?
I don't think the organization, like the end up it being called NAACP means you have to call the people whom it focuses on and emphasizes colored people. I think we can recognize the history and the legacy of said organization and still I'll be a black person. You ain't gotta call me colored. I'm black. But the
Yeah,
NAACP, the legacy that it has, the institution that it is called what it's called.
I got you.
Again, what
So
are you doing?
right? What are you doing? That's a good question, right?
Like
And
now, what are
we
you like? Again, potato to potato, tomato. So I'm gonna keep saying that shit.
And
because
we may need to have the whole NAACP conversation, right? Just give the NAACP its own show. But right now we only, not to get too far. We debaters, y'all know. Like I had a rebuttal, but we gonna stick to what we talking about today. You know what I'm saying?
sure.
I want to point out a comment. C. Hustle said we kill our own movements and never create effective new ones. That is true. We do have a lot of people that tear down the NAACP and ain't did nothing to support
Come on.
any organization that does anything for the advancement of black people, colored people, niggas, Negroes, African Americans, etc. All right.
And that's why I said
So
what I said. I don't know what they're doing, but I do know what they've done, and I don't want to undermine any of those things. That's what I'm thinking. So what you do think is
right,
more likely than not a PR question, a
right,
representation question, a how are you? You still got to sell yourself in
right.
2023.
A
You got to
generational
get people to
question.
believe. I
Because
agree.
I
That's it.
to give them their credit, they are typically responsible for a lot of some of the things we'll talk about today. And when we talk about things like voter suppression, like they sued North Carolina back when they first started introducing their voter suppression bills, the things that they've done in Alabama and Georgia. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund was the first people suing the politicians there. So we want to give them the credit for what they do. They do engage in the institutional efforts that are effective at protecting certain rights for black people. Our conversation is uniquely generational, and how do you
I mean, and
connect?
we also can't go without saying they allowed us to be a part of their platform. We were at their red carpet, at their award ceremony, right, doing our show. So this is not to even undermine that, right? Like George
Yeah,
was a candidate for an NAACP Image
yeah,
Award just a year ago.
right,
Shout out to the Conference League. And so, like we are going to, but this is what we take pride in. This is why we identify as leftists and as independents, right? It gives us an opportunity to take unique and refined and nuanced positions about things that both benefit us, that shape our lived realities, and that potentially put opportunity and money in our pockets. But nothing is above reprieve, right? When we're trying to be
right.
better people and think through some of the strategies that we're using to bring black people together and put black people on the same page. We got to be, talking about and critical of those things.
But what I will, and so giving the NAACP their credit, what I will be critical of is this travel advisory. Because I
Mm-hmm.
do feel like it was performative outrage at its finest, actually. Because to me, again, giving credit where it's due, I think it reflects why people in our generation and younger people don't really take the NAACP serious. And it as serious as they should, to be honest, given all the other institutional efforts that we see the NAACP being engaged in. So while I do agree, with the advisory, I disagree with the motives. Right, I think that there is an advisory that's needed, but doing it because there's an attack on Black history, nah. We need to do it because there's an attack on Black people, and there are more states. Now, Toya, is that being picky? Is that being picky?
No, I think it is forcing. I think it's calling for consistency, and
Right,
some type of better floor. Like your basement shouldn't be. They're picking on Black history. That's not new. They've been trying to lie to
right,
us about what really happened and things like no. So this should have
right,
been that should have been part and parcel with a larger move to make sure that Black people, um, as a people, have constantly been protected far beyond things like the civil rights movement, far
right,
beyond like this whole evolution of policing. I'm not sure why the NAACP hasn't been in the forefront in the face of attempts and moves to change that. Again, we've only had to BLM to look to and no competition for them. So then the standard for not only us, but also the standard for non-black people has been what BLM is talking about and not what other
yeah,
ideas and what other strategies could be.
yeah, yeah. So we can agree, right, that the travel advisory is a good idea. And give them their
Mm-hmm.
credit for that. But then let's just build on that. We had our little back and forth about the NAACP, but we could just build on what the NAACP started, which is kind of talk about the dangers in traveling to particular states. Now, talking about the dangers of traveling to particular states for Black people is not something new. There was this thing known that it was a movie too, starring I don't even know why I tried to say that man first name, but it was a movie starring a very prominent Black actor, uh, and
Who
that
is
name
it?
called Maharsh. Why'd you make me do
Mahershala
that,
Ali.
Toya? Why'd you make me do
Mahershala Ali. You didn't.
that?
You didn't. You
Why'd you make
didn't.
me
You
do
did it.
that? Yeah,
Mahershala Ali. Mm-hmm.
Mahershala Ali. It was a movie called Green Book. that kind of had a similar conversation to the conversation that we have. It. Toya, can you inform us more about the Green Book, please?
The Green Book, most simply put, was a guide that was created by a man by the name of Victor Hugo Green, who lived in Harlem. And the book was a guide for Black people to know and kind of recognize places where their money, where their life, where their presence would be valued and not scrutinized, particularly by white people. So he decided to make this book because he had married a woman who was from Virginia, and they had a series of unfortunate events when he had to take his wife back home. And so from there, everything from beauty salons to gas stations to restaurants to hotels and things like that began to be put in this green book and then circulated and passed around in that area. Now, in the area, and by in the area, I mean like the south, like kind of northeast south region, right? And so you had this that was very important, specifically before the Civil Rights Act. Right, this is in a time of Jim Crow. This is in a time where cars are being more available. More black people are being able to afford automobiles, being able to
On road
afford to
trips.
travel, being able to take
Mm.
more road trips, and so they need extra protection. We also have sundown towns that exist. These are towns where literally not just it might be a little unpleasant if you drive through there when the sun goes down. Like no, you're banned from being in the city when the sun goes down. You are not coming road through there, and
Personal
so.
experience. Personal
Mm,
experience. Norman, Oklahoma was a
mm,
sundown town until the
mercy.
90s.
And this is where he went to college at.
Until the 90s. I spent 8 years in Oklahoma. And it was a sundown town until the 90s. That's one of the first things they teach you when you take the different Black history classes, engage with the Black people. I mean, because it's a lot of historical civil rights shit that took place in Oklahoma. And so, as well as that took place on the campus of the University of Oklahoma. So,
Mhm.
that was as a part of the survival strategy that Black professors pass down the knowledge to Black students is Norman, Oklahoma is not what you think it is just because they love these niggas that play football.
Yeah,
Remember that.
don't get it
Sundown
twisted.
town until the 90s. But go ahead, Toy.
Just the finish talking about Green Books, they eventually grew to be nationwide. The Green Book eventually included all 50 states and even like 5 countries. At some point, it transitioned out of being only about Black owned businesses and Black places that you could go to, but also white establishments that were there. Also, less more so about small businesses and more like lodging opportunities and just general places you want to be. So it transformed the way that Black people were able to live stateside, right, and really get around the country that they lived in,
Travel.
recognizing or
Yeah.
exploring some of these new rights that they were working toward or trying to get. Last couple of things that were interesting about Green Books are one, the man Victor Hugo Green who created it died 4 years before the civil rights movement was passed, so he was actually never able to see the actualization of a lot of the work that he had worked for, or worked to get rid of. He never got to see the other side of it.
Right.
And around 1967, I think, is when Green Book stopped being published, largely because they stopped being needed as much. Right, Black people were able to go in
As
whatever
much.
bathroom or whatever. Yes, as much, because we know just because you change the law and flip a switch, that don't mean people's hearts and minds change. So people probably still
Right.
kept them home, real close to them, even up to shit probably now, because there's some places in the deep south and then in the middle of the country, like your Kansases, in some places in Missouri, why they still might come in handy. I said Missouri, Bree.
Yeah, that's what I said. To be clear,
Um,
we're from those states.
we're some of those places you needed that green book, but yeah, they stopped being in publication, but they a handy dandy tool and a necessary tool to navigate this state. So we get what Florida's trying to get at, right? And I think our conversation is about giving some green book vibes that really give a full circle 2023 look at places that we might want to consider or reconsider for that matter.
So, with that being said, this is pretty much the chop up travel advisory for Black folk in America. What we are going to do today is we're gonna get NAACP their credit, but we're gonna build on the dialogue surrounding states that are dangerous for Black people by providing our own more well-rounded, I would say, critique of
Mm-hmm.
states similar to Florida with institutions and cultures that are dangerous for Black people. Now, Florida's a given, so they're not gonna be on the list, right? Florida, like the whole Florida man thing, just Google Florida man in the news and the type of headlines you would get, crazy, right? So we don't need to put Florida on the list. Florida will be our control. It'll be our independent variable. Toy, you put me on
Absolutely.
game with that. I had to get that rhetoric correct. So
You got
Florida
it.
will
Which
be
one?
our
But which one did you call it?
independent variable.
No, it is the dependent variable.
Okay, all right. So
Mhm.
it's the control of the experiment. I do know that.
The experiment. How do we know the experiment depends on it, right? And then the independents will be the ones that we include in the conversation that become the comparative metrics. See, those are the
So,
love you, meaning.
so we're gonna use Florida as a benchmark. Let's use that. Like we're gonna use Florida as a benchmark to build out the rest of our list. Now we got 6 states that are dangerous for Black folk. Six
Mhm.
states that deserve travel advisories. The rubric that we use to pick out these 6 states was cultural anti-blackness. So how much of racism anti-blackness is literally a part of the state's identity? Gentrification and displacement. How many black people are losing their homes or being priced out of their homes due to rising cost of homes and white people moving into historically black neighborhoods? Politicians and the political climate. What type of politics and politicians are being pushed out and the impact they having on black people? Crime and punishment and incarceration. It's obvious. For each state, we're gonna talk about the racial disparities that exist in incarceration and arrest. Socioeconomic status. Are niggas getting paid? Are we making money?
Mhm.
Right? Are we employed? As well as healthcare, education, etc. And then the amount of black people. And so this one is important. The reason why we're talking about the amount of black people in terms of this list is because we are identifying places where there are a lot of black people already. So
Right.
if like places where there aren't a lot of black people, yes, there are crazy disparities. We know that, right? I mean, that's because there aren't a lot of black people there. Like if you look at the Dakotas, for example, you have like 60,000 black people total in the whole state. You know what I'm saying? If that
Same thing too about Wisconsin, right? Like it's
Right.
just
Same thing with
bigger.
Wisconsin. It's just not a lot of black people there. But we decided to pick states that have all the other things that we listed, have issues with all of those things, but on top of that, it's a lot of black people there, right? So all of these disparities are exacerbated and have a larger impact because of the amount of people that these disparities come into contact with. So
Hmm.
we also want to hear from y'all as we go through this list. We want to know what states would y'all add. Who do y'all think y'all would include? Tyler said we call it the chop book. That's a good name
Yeah,
for it. We love you.
he had me cracking up. He said I put a travel ban on Missouri 15 years ago. I was like,
Hey
"Mhm."
man, come home, Tyler. We all
You know
need
what I'm
to we all
saying?
need to have a little DKC. You know what I'm saying? Link up when we come back. But
It would be crazy.
and we love you too, Winter Dragon. We appreciate you for joining us and everybody else
Absolutely.
that's in. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna get into this list. We want to hear from y'all. What states do y'all feel is dangerous? But we're gonna start out with the 6th one
Oh yeah.
on,
Wait.
our
And two, I
list. Go
want to
ahead.
say some of these states might surprise you, right? Given some of the standards of the rubric that we use, I was when we really kind of narrowed down the list. I was like, dang, for real? Okay, but
Yeah.
when you really pull back, some layers on this thing and look at some of the conditions that folks are living in on a socio-political and a socio-economic level, it's rough. So my bad. I didn't
Right.
mean to cut you off. I know we get into six, but
No, you
I'm just
good.
gonna
You
say
good.
it might surprise you.
Right, because it surprised me, and that's why I wanted to put in the amount of black people, because when we looked at different lists, because these lists exist across the internet, but when we looked at different lists, it was certain the distinctions in different ones didn't really make sense to us as black people that travel,
Hmm.
right? So we wanted to make sure that, because I don't know if that happens to anybody else. This is a quick detour. I don't know if it happens to anybody else, but in my family, whenever we travel places, for whatever reason, the first place they want to go is to the hood. Like they want to go to where other black people are.
People
You know what I
are, yeah,
mean?
for sure.
So it's not like we need to find gas stations that serve black people, but like when black people travel, they just want to go to the places where black people are, right? But in certain states, that creates other issues that you may not be fully aware of. When I first moved out to California, my sisters and them came to visit me, and the first thing they was like, "Take me to Compton." I lived in Long Beach. First thing they say is, "Take me to Compton. Take me to Nipsey Hussle store. I want to go to Crenshaw. You know what I'm saying? I want to see Skid Row." Like what? You know what I mean?
You wanna
So
go see where your people might be.
exactly, well, people that look like you might be.
Yeah.
And so here is our list, starting with the sixth, which is the least dangerous one, but still dangerous nonetheless. We're gonna start with Connecticut,
Number 6, Connecticut.
which may be surprising to some. Shout out to my man Big Ben out there doing this
That's what I'm
thing
about
in
to say. You know,
Connecticut.
we got a friend out there holding it down in Connecticut, a black man doing his thing. Born and
I only
raised
got
too.
one homie. Yeah, I only got one homie. Another thing that
Yeah.
y'all notice as we talk about these states, the first thing that we're gonna preface them with is whether or not they have a critical race theory ban or whether or not they have an abortion ban. The reason being is because this state's relationship with black people tells you their overt stances on how they feel about black people. That doesn't excuse their racism, as y'all gonna see, because everyone that's on this list has those type of issues, but uh we still gonna point that out. So, Toya, can you still hear me?
Help and frame it a little bit. Yeah, I can hear
Okay,
you.
yeah, it sounds like my shit went out real quick. All right, so let's get it. Number 6, Connecticut. I don't know if anybody know anybody in Connecticut or got any family with Connecticut, but there are some major issues out there. Let's get it cracking. There's no CRT ban in Connecticut, and there's no abortion ban in Connecticut. All right, that's black education and women's rights. So on the surface level, they give you that liberal vibe, right? Their politicians aren't as what you would call problematic as other politicians, but there are some major issues that people in Connecticut face. So that's what we're gonna be talking about. Getting into it, the first one is affordable housing and gentrification, right? They are people in Connecticut, specifically black people, are losing affordable housing. So a piece in an independent newspaper entitled "The Connecticut Mirror" breaks down the stats from a report on the housing scene in Connecticut from 2010 to 2017. What we see is that in Hartford, which is, we're going to talk about Hartford more, over 3,600 affordable housing spots to rent disappeared, vanished. They got rid of them. While 2,700 more pricey rental places are popping up. Now, we're going to talk about gentrification throughout this episode, but the thing that y'all got to recognize is it's not just white people moving into the neighborhoods, it's the displacement of black people who have traditionally lived in these areas, right? So what happens with gentrification is also what's known as displacement. So when it's showing here that even the report says that they are at risk of losing 5,000 more affordable homes, right, due to rules that are set to expire because certain states, to combat redlining, to combat segregation, introduce certain policies to be like, hey, we need to have this many affordable homes to rent, right, in the state. But what's happening is that those rules are expiring. So black people, or people, impoverished people, period, but black people specifically in Connecticut, are dealing with the loss of homes that they can actually afford. As it says here, the preservation of affordable housing tends to grab less attention than other issues related to the state's housing stock, but it's an important piece of the conversation as Connecticut looks to expand the number of affordable units. This state lacks tens of thousands of units of housing that are affordable and available to its lowest income renters. What you about to say
I
to you?
mean, I think the thing that also just is stupid too is like the math don't even math in terms of how much housing was denied, like affordable housing was denied versus how much just common housing was built. So it's like you're not even building enough places. There's a housing scarcity, and you're not even building enough places for people to roll the dice to try to get into. You literally are just not meeting the demand, right? Like, and that I think is what is alarming, because you're doubling down on the discrimination or the lack of access that people who need housing get. We already don't have any low income housing, and on top of that, we're just not going to build enough places for you to even put in an application to roll the dice to see what happens to just anything, right? So
Right.
those are issues that I think speak to the interest of, and we haven't really had enough conversations about tenants issues and issues rather, and renters rights, and the ways that tenants in that particular industry is bad for the common person, let alone black people. But it's a lot to be said there about that imbalance.
So, on top of that, what makes it even more dangerous? So we got the first part that's dangerous is that they are losing affordable housing. The second is what we call modern segregation, because what a lot of people talk about, and it's crazy because people complain about segregation, like when they integrated us, it made it worse, and it's like, nigga, they integrated us just to segregate all over again. Y'all have no idea what y'all talking about. Prisonpolicy.org speaks to this. And specifically in Connecticut, where the segregation actually leads to higher imprisonment for people in the black areas. So, according to prisonpolicy.org, among the 5 most populous cities in Connecticut, Hartford has the highest portion of black residents. That's 37% of the city population. Given what we know about policing targets, or how policing targets low-income communities and communities of color, it may not be surprising that Hartford is missing more than 1% of its population to prison.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
Come on. So it's the most segregated part, or one of the most segregated parts of Connecticut, where
Wow.
it's mostly a large, well, it's mostly Latino, but you have a large black population, and then 1% of that population is literally locked up.
Yeah.
Right, is literally locked up, and
I wonder
to
what that
take
math ends up being, like one in how many people? Like one in every 25th person or something ridiculous, I bet.
something right, yeah, that's because 1% of your whole come on now. And what makes it worse is that when we look at the state of Connecticut, it's a website entitled vera.org, where you can see all like economic, poverty statistics, as well as incarceration stats. You go to Vera and you put in the state. 43% of the incarcerated population in the state of Connecticut are black, while we only make up 12% of the state population total.
Bruh.
43% of black, 12% of the population total, right? Connecticut, and when compared to the rest of the country, is one of the most racially segregated states in the nation. There are a bunch of reasons for this as well, and that was actually outlined here in a title that in a report that broke down Hartford segregation. And again, shout out to the NAACP. They partnered with different organizations to produce this report. But what they explain is that by all available measures, both the state of Connecticut and the Hartford metropolitan area have extremely high levels of racial and ethnic segregation in housing and public schools relative to other population area or metropolitan areas in the United States. So the reason why, even though Connecticut don't have a CRT ban and the reason why they're on this list is because they are more segregated than many other places that we talk about. And that the things that have caused segregation, and then I'm gonna get to you, Toya, is first federal, state, and local government action and willful inaction included repeated rejections of regionalism, which is having different districts supported by the state as opposed to having independent school districts, which end up pushing out black students and impoverished students. Second, Connecticut is home to racially discriminatory action on the part of institutions, industries, and individuals over which state and government failed to employ adequate enforcement authority. So the discrimination or systemic and institutional discrimination is crazy in Connecticut, even though they have policies that they've created to push back against it. And then lastly, what the NAACP and other organizations argue is the reason for segregation in Connecticut is contemporary and continuing government action, including fidelity or this relationship to enforcement of school district borders and well-documented exclusionary housing-related practices, which state officials have long known to buttress and exacerbate segregation. So it's an effort, right? It's a concerted effort on the politicians that claim to be against racism and segregation, but at the same time calling for local authority as a way to kind of carve up what the city and what the school boards look like. And so based on that relationship, we see these massive aspects of segregation. You were saying something, Toya?
No, I wasn't saying it. I think if anything, I was just saying again, a place you wouldn't, because Connecticut is not in the news, right? Connecticut
Right.
is not a huge part of conversation. When I think about jail and prison and black people, I think of some other people, some other states who might be on this list, but I don't think of Connecticut as the place where, there's enough black people that live there, one, but two, that those black people are, subject to being one in who knows how many citizens being the people in their jails. 46% of the jail population and 12% of the people in the state is mind-boggling. It's
Boggling.
mind-boggling. Well, we know it's mind-boggling, but it is mind-blowing in a lot of ways that's the case. So yeah, I mean, but we don't want to stop there. I know we got now sliding into the top five.
Right.
A whole
So Connecticut was there on the edge because it masters, or it operates within forms of de jure, hidden segregation, but it's one state that does it better than Connecticut, and that's number 5 on our list. And as I said, we want y'all to be a part of the conversation. Please, the states that y'all are like y'all niggas stay away from, y'all go ahead and put that in the chat. But
Winter
the
Dragonhead, Idaho, and Oregon outside of Portland specifically, are places that they would throw into the hat as some places to stay away from. So
I looked at those. They slightly different. They slightly different. But that's a great addition. But who we got number 5 on this list? Oddly enough, might be a bit of a surprise, or maybe not. Actually, due to all of the controversy surrounding recent protests over the last 3-4 years, 5 years, whatever. Next on the list, we have the great state of Minnesota.
Minnesota.
5 on the list is the great state of Minnesota. And Toya, I appreciate that Minnesotan accent. But the reason why
Minnesota.
we have Minnesota on the list at number 5, and it could be a surprise. You don't hear about Minnesota in a lot of ways. Uh and Avenge the Ancestors. Who it said is a state for foundational DSOAs. Explain that acronym in the chat for us, please. But getting into number 5 on the list, Minnesota. Now Minnesota is actually considering a critical race theory ban. They haven't done it. No laws have been passed, but they are considering it. But they do not have an abortion ban. They do not have
Mm-hmm.
an abortion ban. So, now, why are we putting Minnesota on this list? Well, a lot of people on YouTube will actually feel me on this because this is one of their favorite punching bags, one of their favorite talking points. But that is liberal racism. Liberal racism, democratic racism. Minnesota is one of the places that when y'all hear black people constantly complaining about Democrats, it's because of the Democrats in places like Minnesota. I want to take a look at this article written by a black man that moved to Minnesota, Samuel L. Myers, and what he pointed out that I thought was extremely interesting. Let's take a look at some of what he was talking about to help us understand this. All right. Now he said, while Minnesota is a great place to live for white people, for black people, it's just like everywhere else, and sometimes worse. That's the kicker. Because a lot of the things that we're gonna talk about in these states that we've listed or have similar problems in other places, but it's because they're worst in these places. And Minnesota is one of them. This is what I've termed as the Minnesota paradox. Huge racial disparities masked by aggregate outcomes, and it's an issue that I've been studying since moving to Minnesota in the 1990s. The continued existence of this paradox is driven by buried racism. Who do we accuse of burying racism the most, Toya?
White people.
White, but white who?
White mean people. White
White.
liberals.
There you go. White liberals bury their
White liberals. They
racism.
yeah, like they play in your face. I'm sorry, I was getting there. I was coming. I was a little slow. I was
Yeah.
connecting it because all of my
No.
answers are correct. But yes,
Yes.
the ones
They were
who
all right. Yeah.
are able to, play in your face are the most insidious because you don't really realize it. And they also have too this thing called Minnesota nice, right? Where it's like very nice, nasty.
Nice
Anyway, they
nasty.
do some
Yeah.
real, you know what I'm saying? They're nice, but they're not kind. right? I rather you don't have to be nice to me, but you can still be kind to me, right?
But
Like, and I think
yeah,
that's the like New York style of niceness where they like, bitch, get your ass over here and get a bagel. I don't know how they talk in New York, but I know it's like a whole lot more rough, but it still is love. You know what I'm saying? There, it's a whole lot of fake shit and niceties, but there's no love. There's no real kindness or care for you.
yeah.
And so you add that on top of some liberal racism and some just good old fashioned racism, and now you got a
Mm-hmm.
recipe for disaster when it comes to black folks.
That easily smile in your face but be on whole bullshit, like tell you they, oh yeah, I'm definitely anti-racist, but have a bunch of motherfucking a bunch of racist views. and
Mm-hmm.
uh and as was described, what it said here in the article, the structure of many Minnesota's policies, and this is, and so listen, I get it, we going into election season. I just dropped a video on our Instagram and my TikTok at the political plug. Y'all go check that out, where I'm responding to Dr. Umar Johnson complaining about black people voting because Democrats. This is where
Mm-hmm.
Umar has a point, even though I cooked him on everything else that he was talking about. This is where he has a point. This is where black people who complain about Democrats has a point. Listen here. Many of Minnesota's policies and institutions, like police policies, housing policies, even regulations about driver's license and renewal tags, have a disproportionately adverse impact on non-whites. These effects are not overcome by Minnesota's progressivism. The disparate impact that we see on non-whites is not impacted by being a liberal. He goes on to say Minnesota has been a magnet for African American residents seeking a better life. When it was illegal in most states in the country to marry a white woman, Minnesota was like, nah, y'all can come in, y'all can marry white women here. When job opportunities for black chemists and engineers from Howard University in Hampton were limited, Minnesota corporations like 3M and Honeywell were unabashed recruiters of African
Yeah.
American talent. That's liberalism. They can see the value. Yeah, come here and marry white women, and come here and marry a black man, right?
Yeah.
Come here and, oh, you got an engineering degree from Howard. Come to Minnesota, right? Come take your engineering talents to Minnesota. Here's the kicker.
Gotcha.
Unfortunately, the small number of black people who lived in Minnesota in the early 20th century and through the post-era war faced brutal redlining practices, right? Policing policies that substituted overt, explicit racial profiling for scientifically managed administration of racially disparate arrests. What they mean by scientifically managed racially arrest is that, well, let's look at the places where, let's use math to look at the places where there's the most crime, and go to
Mm-hmm.
those places where math tells us the most crime and use that math to be like, we should police here. Okay, y'all ignoring the role poverty and segregation plays in increases of crime. And so what you're doing is you are using the racism that has shaped the environment and shaped the actions of people to then say that's a justification for us to police them more instead of
Yeah.
providing resources.
I want to say in that same regard and under that same logic, rest in peace to Tyree Nichols, who was in Nashville and he was targeted. His life was taken because of that type of policing and being in those type of neighborhoods. There's a bunch
Right.
of different levels and layers to that story, but some of them was those task units that have been put in certain communities to over police them. Secondly, is we'd be reticent if we didn't bring up the name of George Floyd, because what you had there is Derek Chauvin, who had his knee on the neck, but you had what, five, six different officers of all different racial backgrounds, white, Asian, I think Cambodian or Filipino or something like that. A whole bunch of
A
different
bunch of,
people out
yeah. It was a black dude, a white dude,
there.
an
It was
Asian dude.
at the grocery store, right? And in a place where crime and criminalization happens. We know now that the 20 wasn't fake. We know now that he didn't ever commit no crime. We know now that he got policed and then got ignored when his body was left to be, dying and dissipating on the sidewalk. And all of that is a reflection of that liberalism that is able to seep through and create the type of policing that we're talking about right now. So I got to say those two names because those are the two people who, I definitely think of when you talk about that element of the way that communities have been developed there and policing has been attached to it.
And so, what the article points out here is that while the liberalism of Minnesota has made it to where they can, have the cable news talking points and the cable news politics, but if you look at the threads, if you look under the hood in Minnesota, regardless of how progressive, of how liberal those people act, you will see the same forms of racism. On
Mm-hmm.
top of the same forms of racism that you see in Minnesota, another issue that you see black people dealing with in Minnesota is a socioeconomic status that is ranked third in the racial wealth
Jesus.
gap. Let's go ahead and take a look at now. What I'm showing you here is the states with the largest racial wealth gap in 2023. States with the biggest and smallest wealth gaps. So the state with the biggest wealth gap is District of Columbia, right? But it's a lot of things associated with that. And so you're gonna see states on here that we don't have on our list, but again for our reasons listed. Minnesota is third. So with we at least in the top five, right? We needed to have at least one of these states. If you take the liberal racism of Minnesota and you add it with the racial wealth gap that exists there, because like again, what's listed here is the biggest median household income gap, right? The most disadvantaged group by that gap is, drum roll please, black people. It's black people at 46%, right? There's a 46% gap between the amount of money that black people are making and the amount of money that white people are making. This isn't a progressive state, people. This isn't a liberal run state, people. Biggest home ownership gap, 66% or 67% if you round up, against black people. Biggest poverty rate, 271%.
Jeez.
Or excuse
Sheesh.
me. Yeah, 271.83% for black people. That's the poverty rate gap. That's the poverty rate gap. It's that many more black people impoverished than white people, right?
Wow.
In Minnesota. So that shows you that the liberal progressive politics that we see to come out of these states don't save us. Right. And so when people are complaining about Democrats, I get it. It's understandable. Right. Because we still see these type of numbers, but Democrats aren't the end all be all. Right. But what
Right.
we explaining is black people. If you think about moving to Minnesota because you like what's like Ilhan Omar and them, I think you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like if that's who if you see them on cable news and you like Minnesota is the place that I need to be, this is the
Nah.
information gonna tell you otherwise. Ilhan Omar is dope as hell. Politicians are my celebrities, black politicians specifically. I love Ilhan. I love like the whole squad. I'm a fan of those people. I would never move to Minnesota. Right.
I don't like the snow, so I'm never moving to Minnesota. But
Right, I don't
also,
like the snow either. But here, this is the circumstance that black people are under. And lastly, again, we got to talk about crime and punishment. We got to talk about the incarceration rates in Minnesota. Oh, almost tricked off. Almost tricked off. We can't forget that after what happened with George Floyd, what we got was we found out that a state investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department showed that there was a pattern of discriminatory race-based policing.
yep.
This means that what happened with George Floyd exposed that there is a racist system that dictated the way that police actually engaged in who it was that they felt like deserved to be arrested. And what was highlighted when we talked about the neoliberal race or the liberal racism that we see in Minnesota, it's the policies say, oh, it's just numbers. But with those numbers, the numbers that they drew up, right, led to discriminatory policing. Discriminatory policing. What it says in this article, a pattern of practice of race discrimination based on the numbers. Based on the numbers, which led to an incarceration rate of 35. Now this is where it's crazy. Black people only make up 80% or 8. Just to make sure that we know what we talk about. 0.8% of the population in Minnesota, but they make up 35% of the people in jail.
Hold on, you said what percentage? I got a different number for black percentage of population. So what did you say?
Right here it say 8.
You said 8%?
In Minnesota? You looking at Minnesota?
I got a Minnesota population 2023 demographic map that says 6.43%. We could be splitting hairs here, but what we can say confidently is that there's a whole lot of black people in jail for the amount of black people in this state. Once again,
yeah, right. Yeah, it's a 8% here, but yeah, we a few You know what I'm saying? Percent. Regardless, it's less than 10% of the
It's
population, but it's
less than 10% of
35%.
the population. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause C Dot asked the question, what's our popular? Oh, C Dot, it's going to get worse, family.
That's what made me look. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to get worse. So again, Minnesota, as much as we have the liberal politicians and we have the people that we think is cool. When you look at the socioeconomic gap between black people and white people in Minnesota, when you look at the practices of policing, because they saying they doing something about it now, but they've been doing something about it for years, right? And
Yeah.
so what we have to recognize is if there has been a practice of racist policing at some point, that practice of racist policing still exists there. So Minnesota is on the list at number 5.
Number 5.
On the list at number 5. Let's get into number
Number 5.
4. Let's get into number 4. Number 4. This is where it starts kind of getting interesting. These are states that y'all more might be familiar with. States that y'all probably have no problem. Where when we start bringing these up, y'all gonna be like, yeah. And we got some surprises on the way, but you'll see those as well. But for number 4, dangerous state, travel advisory. Y'all keep your head on the swivel in these places. Illinois. Number 4 on the list is Illinois. This is where it starts getting interesting. Illinois is considering a CRT ban. No abortion ban, though. Considering a CRT ban. The issues that people in Illinois are facing, it's unique, but it's still a lot of the same. Gentrification, but also environmental racism. Right?
Yeah, that's a key one.
Gentrification.
In Illinois specifically.
With environmental racism. Now, when we start talking about gentrification and affordable housing, according to a report by the National Fair Housing Alliance, Illinois had the 5th highest number of housing discrimination complaints in the country in 2022, with over 400 complaints filed. Okay, so when people complaining about how they treated in terms of getting homes and being able to afford homes, or how they treated in terms of the process of getting a home, they received the 5th most complaints. Again, there are other places that probably have received more that aren't on this list, but it's a lot of black people in Illinois. Go ahead, tell you.
A lot of black people in Illinois. I know you're probably thinking the heart of Illinois, which is Chicago. Want to be clear, which is probably where a lot of these complaints are happening. Chicago is the 3rd largest city in this country, right? It is only behind, I think, 3rd behind. I think it's New York, LA, Chicago, San Francisco, Houston, or Houston and San Francisco go back and forth.
Yeah, I think
right, but
yeah. Go ahead.
But that they're in the top 5 most populated place. So Illinois has a ton of people, right? So when you start to do that math and think about then city centers or epicenters of populations like Chicago, that's a lot of people who are facing just statistically housing discrimination.
That's a lot of people, right? That's just the housing discrimination aspect of it. Let's talk about the environmental racism that people in Illinois are dealing with. The Illinois Environmental Protection Agency has identified multiple heavily polluting facilities in black communities, which increase the risk of exposure to toxic chemicals that cause cancer and other respiratory diseases. According to the National Resources Defense Council, black people are twice as likely as white people to live within half a mile of a polluter's facility. We're more than likely to live next to facilities that give niggas cancer. According to the National Resource Defense Council, nearly 1 million people in Illinois were served by water systems where they were violations of health-based drinking water standards in 2017. Do y'all hear me? 1 million people are drinking. I don't even want to eat at a donut spot that got a C rating from the health department. 1 million people were drinking water from institutions that were violating health-based drinking water standards. Guess what? 50% of those people were people of color. Surprises there? No, not at all. Also, according to a report by the American Association, nearly 5 million people in Illinois live in environments with unhealthy levels of air population. But according to the NAACP, because I know you got to take data, you got to racialize it in order to understand the real impact. According to the report
Right.
by the NAACP, African Americans are exposed to 38% more polluted air than Caucasian Americans, and they are 75% more likely to live in fence line communities than the average American.
Mercy.
Come on now. We breathing the worst air. We drinking the terrible water. And these are the places where black people are the most. Now again, they don't have a CRT ban, no abortion ban, which means like Illinois has like liberal politicians. I think they have one liberal senator, one conservative senator, right? But there's a mix. But like the overt shit that we see from conservatives, we don't necessarily see that in Illinois. But we still see massive environmental racism and displacement due to gentrification. How black people are treated when they go to receive homes. The second major issue they face, to you, employment opportunities and income. Employment opportunities and income. Let's go. Let's go back to our list. Where is Illinois on the list? Top
Where is
10.
it? I can't see. Top
It's right
10.
here. Top 10. Let me zoom in a little bit so y'all can see. Now, Minnesota was 3. You know what I'm saying? Which got it, which really was one of the main reasons why it was on the list in the first place. But what you see here, Illinois cracks the top 10 right here. All right.
Uh,
44% or 45% poverty gap, 46% home owning gap, 177% poverty gap. 177% poverty gap for black people in Illinois, as opposed to white people in Illinois. So, and then, and listen, when people be bringing up, well, why y'all always black, white, black? Because that helps us understand the disparities. Because
yeah.
everybody else falls in between that, right? Everybody
The
else
numbers
falls in
matter.
between that. What did I tell you?
The numbers matter. You don't
They
want them to, but that's the thing. We bring things up, but we are able to quantify the experiences or the feelings that we feel when we go to places and can't find opportunity or can't find resources. These are not just stories or anecdotes. Those are just parts of what is solid research, right? That part of it is only alluding and elucidating to what the numbers are telling us, which is that black people and brown people, and I think what's very important to understand about these numbers is, I mean, you realize what we talked about, Connecticut, that's in the Northeast. We talked about Minnesota, that's directly central, north central part of the country. Now we in the Midwest, right? So it's not a lot of places black people are able to be able to go, to be able to afford to live, to afford to stay above the poverty rate, or
above the
have some
poverty
type of
line.
income that is anywhere near competitive than almost 50% of their counterparts, right? So these are necessary, quantifiable conversations, and it always comes down to race. It just does.
Always. Always. Another thing, and also definitely make sure y'all chiming in the chat. You know what I'm saying? Make sure y'all chiming in the chat. Because the more y'all able to add to the conversation, the more robust it is. So we definitely want to hear from y'all.
Shout out to
But
Hood Therapy.
shout out to Hood Therapy, Shabo in the building. Um, but where we also see these gaps is reflected in unemployment. Dr. Cedric Johnson, a professor of African American studies, stated that black people in Illinois are disproportionately represented in low wage, dead end jobs and face significant challenges in securing well paying jobs and moving up the employment ladder. In a study conducted by the National Bureau of Economic Research, black job seekers in Illinois were found to receive 45% fewer callbacks. Let me
Hmm.
reiterate. In a study conducted by the National Bureau of Economic Research, black job seekers in Illinois were found to receive
45%.
45% fewer callbacks. Toya, that means that black people are not getting called back for jobs than white seekers with identical resumes.
They
45%.
applying.
They
This is why I'm always reluctant to. I listen to a lot of economic reports that talk about things, for example, like the employment rate in this country and how it is going down. For example, I think during this particular time, it's seeing like some month consistently lows. since like before the pandemic, which is how we quantify everything now. What does it look like now versus before
Mm-hmm.
the pandemic? But what we're seeing is that in with Black people, of course, they're not nearly bouncing back nearly as fast, even within that success. So yes, unemployment is going down. But if you look at the particulars of certain demographics like Black people, the employment of Black people is not going up. There, the Black and we know about the pandemic that Black and the pandemic affected Black and Brown women, for example, the worst.
The
And
worst.
those have
Yep.
been the people who have had the most difficult time recovering, largely because of things like childcare that was already inaccessible and now was doubly and triply inaccessible.
Mm-hmm.
The move to
Mm-hmm.
automation and AI as a result of the pandemic, but also the natural progression of technology is starting to eradicate jobs that they would have been qualified for. So it's
Mm-hmm.
very much more complicated than just the numbers that exist for employment. You can look at case in points like the numbers you just talked about. 45% of people just not getting called. They applying, they showing up, they're doing their part. They're just not getting returns on those investments.
Exactly. And they trying, but then I think this kind of speaks to what Black people grow up. The advice that we always hear is we got to work 5 times harder. We got to be 10 times better. So and these statistics prove why. Right, we get 45% fewer callbacks than white job seekers. The last set of statistics I want to talk about with employment opportunities and income in Illinois, according to data from the Illinois Department of Employment Security, the unemployment rate for Black Illinois residents was 15.4 in the second quarter of 2020, which was more than double the rate of white residents in that same time span, 7.2%. 7.2%. So even when we look at these disparities in employment opportunities and our ability to make income, it like when we look at this unemployment rate, it's you can't ignore, right, the disparities in callbacks in job seekers,
Right.
right? We can't ignore these things, but yet when there are individuals who look at these numbers and say, well, that's because white people work harder. Like, come on, bro. Like the data, if you connect the dots, you'll see these numbers make sense given the policies and the ways that Black people are treated in the labor market. And
Absolutely.
of course, we're not gonna move forward without looking at the incarceration rates in Chicago, or excuse me, Illinois, which are probably heavily impacted by Chicago. But when we look at the racial disparities in incarceration in Illinois, you'll see that Black people make up 15% of the population in Illinois. But they make up, I was about to say only, stop, 53, over half
Yeah.
of the incarcerated population in Illinois are Black people, while we only make up 15% of the entire population. Help us.
Mercy.
53 to you? More than
It's
half? I mean, slightly more than
aggressive.
half, but more than half. That is extremely aggressive. That is extremely aggressive. I mean,
Aggressive.
like, because the part that we ignore when we look at that 15 to 53 is that means that being a part of that small population, you are targeted for
Yeah.
incarceration.
That's the only explanation that there could be for how more of you could find your way to a jail cell than the entire rest of the population. Shout out to Jaleesa in the building.
Shout
But
out to
that
Big
that
Dog,
that
Jaleesa in the building.
it's the only logical math for how that can possibly be that way. Because what do we know? There is no such thing as a disparity in things like drug use or access to weapons or whatever. There are only people who end up being more penalized and charged for those specific crimes.
Right. And
I.e.,
that's
the
on top
fewer
of
the
the
matter.
fact That's on top of the fact that white people make up 60% of the population in Illinois. But what is that? Tweet, does that say 31% of the imprisoned?
It could.
That's like 31.
I can't see,
It's
but
it's
yeah.
it's small. Yeah, I need to zoom. Yeah. But 31, trust me, I'm telling y'all, go to the website. It's called, if you want to understand incarceration rates, incarceration trends in this country, just go to the website Vera, Vera Trends, and you will find these numbers. And yes, 60% of the population of Illinois is white, while only 31% are reflected in the incarcerated, which is ridiculous. So Illinois, y'all see where it rank, and y'all see the reasons. It's starting to get worse. I'm telling you.
Yeah, yeah.
Cause what was Illinois was fourth, right? So we
Yep.
going into three, number three. Okay, Illinois was fourth. We're going into the number three slot of the most dangerous places for black people to travel. This is the CHOP book. As Tyler pointed out, the travel
Yeah.
advisory for black people that's wanting to meet, link up, see other black people in the United States. This is the shit you got to deal with. Going into this next one, this may be a surprise, but it was actually predicted in the chat. Who predicted it? Let me go back. Let me see who predicted it. I think it was Shabo, Hood Therapy, that predicted it. But Ohio is ranked number 3 on our list.
Yeah.
Ohio is ranked number 3 on our list. Surprisingly, right? Surprisingly, Tyler said half of the Illinois governors have been a part of the incarcerated numbers. That's funny because we know how crooked shit is in Illinois.
Right.
But on the third on our list, on Ohio, they are considering CRT bans and they're considering abortion bans. So y'all see how the reason why I wanted to point that out is because y'all see as the list got worse, the overt relationship these states have with black people and women's rights, right? Because we know that when we talk about women's rights, the reason why that's important is because black women get the short end of the stick whenever there's a conversation of women's rights. So if we know that that something is impacting women, we know that it's impacting black women more than it is impacting anybody else. And so when we look at these states considering abortion bans, we also know that regardless of what you think about abortion, they have a fucked up perception of women's rights, reproductive rights, period. Regardless of how you feel or where you fall on that line of abortion. Same thing with critical race theory. Ohio is considering both. But let's get into the issues, Toya. The main issue is one that we was kind of familiar with. We've already discussed in similar northern states, modern day segregation. Modern day segregation, but done in a way that causes voter suppression.
Right.
So, according to a recent study by the Color of Law Coalition, the Color of Law Ohio Coalition, Ohio's residential segregation is remarkably severe residential segregation by race and income, and is the key driver of socioeconomic disparities experienced by black Ohioans. Yeah, I think it's Ohioans. The disparity is a result of discriminatory housing policies that date back to the 1930s. When, what's our favorite word when we talk about segregation? Redlining allowed banks to deny mortgages to black home buyers, effectively trapping them in segregated neighborhoods. Were you surprised by Ohio, Toya?
Yes and no. Ohio is one of those, I feel like they call Missouri and Kansas and Nebraska and shit flyover states. I feel like Ohio is right there with us in the sense that I don't know shit about them neither. And so from that regard, it's like I just figured it was a very white place. I had no doubt in my mind about that. And then, people just always kind of shit on Cleveland. Like, that's a terrible place to be and it's so boring or whatever. So, like, I've heard the cliches. I was a huge Jim Carrey fan when I was growing up. So that was my little taste of Cleveland. But I didn't really think of it as a, conservative or anti-black oasis. I didn't know that it was such a place that has such an appetite toward rejecting black people. I just knew it to be a very white place. So,
right.
I guess one kind of denotates more often than not the other. I just didn't think that far into it.
The funny thing about it, ARE Radio in the chat said, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. Not surprised at all. Ohio is on every list that's negative.
Mercy,
hey,
I'm so sorry.
So I'm glad we was able to keep the trend going.
I heard more recently. I did hear some real good ass food in Ohio, like in Cleveland and in Columbus, that we don't know about. But that's something positive.
Well, the food be good, but it's police always watching the people that's making the food, so we got to be careful.
I don't disagree. I'm trying to redeem it for
ARE Radio.
Yeah, I'm trying to throw something positive into your day.
Well, I'm gonna fuck it up again because according to reports by the National Fair Housing Alliance, in 2019, Ohio had the second highest number of fair housing complaints per capita in the country. Remember, we was just talking about Illinois had the fifth highest.
Out of here.
Ohio had the second highest number of fair housing complaints per capita in the country, demonstrating that discrimination in housing is still a prevalent issue for this state. The report also found that black Americans were most likely to experience housing discrimination, with over 62% of the complaints in Ohio coming from black individuals or black families. Okay?
You got a
So
48% chance of being somewhere you ain't gonna have to complain about, or that you actually gonna be able to get into without suspicion of not being able to sign a lease. That's pretty crazy.
hold on, but let's keep it going though, right? Let's keep it going. Check this out. My wife graduated from Ohio State, so I know a few things about. I spent a little bit of time in Columbus, visiting, right?
Hmm.
Uh, but what I didn't know is that the Ohio State University, and I hate how they say the Ohio State, but
The
anyway,
Ohio State University,
yeah,
yeah.
Ohio State Universities was Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity. Let me respect them because we have similar missions, right? So shout out to the Ohio State University's Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity, because what they found was over 50% of black residents in Ohio live in neighborhoods with poverty rates of 20% or higher. Who live in neighborhoods with poverty rates of 20% or higher, compared to only 6% of white residents living in similarly impoverished neighborhoods.
Wow.
Only 6%. The report also found that black residents in Ohio are less likely to own their homes and more likely to experience housing insecurity and homelessness. What is housing insecurity? Housing insecurity is when things like rent, right, the cost of living and other factors play a role in terms of how they shift and alternate to make it to where people don't know if they're going to be able to pay their rent next month. You don't know if you're going to
Mm.
have a home due to
Yes.
the economic situation, the employment situation, the rent situation, and where you are. Ohio is one of the places where we are more likely to experience either homelessness or housing insecurity. What you was about to say,
Mm.
Tweet?
Nothing. I'm here with the comments up there. He said I never bring my kids with me when I look to rent, but once I get them keys, too late. I ain't mad at that at all.
Right.
Definitely not mad
Uh
at that shit.
who ARE radio said eateries is A1 in Cleveland. Oh yeah, cuz I ended up fucking with some really good food trucks in Ohio. My boy Tyler said Ohio was a big steel state like Indiana. Once that industry died, they never were able to recover. Appreciate the history. So what
Yeah.
ended up happening is the people who lost their jobs when those manufacturing plants ended up leaving, steel plants ended up leaving. It was black people, right? And we see that being reflected in the socioeconomic status of Ohio right now. Also, in terms of voter suppression with the way that they segregate. According to a study by the U.S. Government Accountability Office, black voters were more likely than white voters to lack the necessary identification needed to vote under the very strict voter ID laws that come out of
Boo.
there. In
Compare.
2011, Ohio passed a bill that shortened the early voting window, which was heavily utilized by black people in Ohio. They also removed what was called the Golden Week. These are all things that help black people vote, y'all. So when people telling
I
y'all
mean,
that oh they don't if black, like Umar would say, if they wanted, if voting could change anything, it would be illegal. You know what I'm saying?
like, nigga, come on. It is. And
it,
if it was if they were so right and so good about what they do, they wouldn't have to cheat. You know what I'm saying? So you have to ask yourself, if voting is so powerless, right? And you know, me and you were going back and forth about the institution. But if it's
mm-hmm.
so powerless, then why do niggas go out of their way to cheat? Why is Trump talking about finding them ballots? Why is it y'all retracing and redoing the lines and this, that, and the other to
All of
rig it?
that.
If y'all so right and the
If
system's
you
so
so right.
fair and it's running as it should, what you so pressed about? They can't answer them questions because they know that there is power behind investment and representation. What we do with that and where we go with it is with the
It's
criticism,
a whole nother, yep.
but
Yep.
that's a
Whole
whole
nother
separate
thing.
conversation, right? For this,
Mm-hmm.
for all intents and purposes, we got to ask ourselves about the value behind ballots, and I think the white people know it. You know what I mean? In a lot of ways, we have,
Of
for
course.
rightful reasons, been a little fractured on how we should look at those little tickets and those little tokens we get to cash in and put in with names on them. But they're worth revisiting, and particularly now, because why are we looking at abortion bans and CRT and shit? Because people are voting for that shit. People are showing up to talk
Exactly.
about that shit. People are coming together, and people with power who have been voted for are starting to signal boost about that shit. And so now it's a thing because
and
of
and they
voting.
think, and they at least think that there are people who vote that care about banning CRT.
Yeah. I mean,
You
and
know what I'm
here's the
saying?
thing. They don't even think that a lot of people, but they know the way voting works and the disenchantment people have.
It ain't.
So all they need is
Yes.
enough motherfuckers to show up. They don't even need a
Enough.
lot of them. They just need enough old ass people who
Enough.
don't do nothing but watch the news all day and watch them on TV all day, call them out to the polls and take advantage of a chance. And then you got thousands of people, and not even multiple thousands, but just enough people in a
Just
city or
enough.
in a school
In a
district or
local
in a
election,
state
yeah, in a school district, a
to
district
push
attorney's,
something. Just enough.
a city council,
Come on.
just enough,
And
right?
now all of a sudden, everybody looking at each other, it's stupid. Like, how did this happen? It's because Gertrude and Annabelle and Miss Sharon
Florence.
and listen, they all got together. Gertrude, I mean, listen, every Beatrice, all of them got together and said, "Honey, tell me where to be so we can shut this shit DOWN down." That's all it
So
is.
so one thing Toya pointed out is like why they cheating, right? If they can just get it, why they cheating? So in 2011, all of this we gonna see is after
Shout out to
Obama was
hood
elected.
therapy, man.
She said LeBron, Science
Look, man.
Museum, Rock Hall. All right, yeah, okay, all right. Y'all got y'all ring. Y'all got
They said
y'all
I'm
ring.
trying to name all the nice things in my city, trying to impress, and at least we're not Detroit. Let's not
But
come
look,
for that
she said
squad.
at least.
I love it.
Hey,
That's
we
what I'm
over.
talking about.
It's
Blow up the comments, man.
it's chill. It's chill. You know, it's all the Midwest, so we get it, right? But the things that we can't
No
ignore
offense,
is
Tyler.
that
No offense. No offense. No offense, Tyler. He
all
must
of
got a miss.
these
He must got a Miss Sharon in his life. He said, "Chill on Miss Sharon." That's my bad.
uh
My foul. All of these what?
these voter ID laws all came post Obama,
Mm-hmm.
like being elected and then almost being reelected. So in 2011, Ohio passed a bill to get rid of what was called the Golden Week, which was a period during before the election where people could register to vote early and cast the early vote the same day. So you could get registered to vote and cast the vote the same day during the
Mm-hmm.
Golden Week. Who was taking advantage of that the most? Black people.
Black folk.
Y'all
Black
thought I was
folk.
gonna say Democrats? No, black people who
Yeah.
just so happened was voting for Democrats, so I get it. But yeah, it was black people. Then in 2018, a predominantly black county in Ohio saw the closure of 70% of its polling sites.
That's
Seventy
is that not
percent.
crazy? Does that not just seem gratuitous? Does that
Very
not
much so.
seem just extra to the even to the poll taker downers, to the people who just like we're gonna lock these doors, we're not gonna lock those? Don't that just sound crazy to you? And
Look, I
somebody who
mean,
allegedly believes in the institution of voting, like
even if it don't sound crazy, it's still deliberate. Like clearly,
70 of
you feel
seventy
me?
percent of them bitches.
Feel me? Let's get through Ohio though. So that's the segregation and voter suppression that people in Ohio deal with. But then you got crazy health disparities, where we see that there's research that shows that black Ohioans are treated 10.3 times worse in healthcare due to being black, and have
Mm.
2 times more of what's called a severe housing cost burden compared to other groups, and see nearly 3 times more infant mortality. These are black babies when compared with other Ohioans. To be clear, severe housing cost burden speaks to the fact that the majority of income that black people accrue goes to their housing.
Mm-hmm.
So a housing cost burden is when most of your income literally goes to you making sure you have somewhere to live. So that the
Mm.
reason why that impacts healthcare is because of shit like that. Most black people don't have healthcare.
Yeah,
They
you
don't
gotta
have
choose.
insurance. And then when they
I know every single day I'm gonna need to come in this house. I know every single day I'm gonna need the walls and the roof to cover me up. I don't know if I'm gonna need to go to the hospital this month or in the next 30 days. So why would I make that type of commitment? Right? That's already something that people, typically people who are impoverished, look at like as a scam. Right? People look at housing insurance, car insurance, life insurance, health insurance, like it's a get over. So if I have to choose door one, number one, and door number two, I'm gonna choose the door,
what
meaning
what
one that
what
I should close
the
behind. to get from away from the world. I'm gonna choose door number
If I
one.
gotta choose door number one or door number two, I'm gonna choose having a door.
Sure.
I'm gonna choose going because I know that if I feel sick, I'm gonna just go give me some ginger ale. I'm gonna call it a day. I ain't got time to be
Hello.
going to nobody's ER
Here's the
because
thing
not
about ginger
only
ale.
go ahead.
You know they've been lying on ginger ale. They've been saying ginger ale don't work. And the thing is, you got to remember, you can't just drink the ginger ale. You got to drink the ginger ale and then go sit your ass down somewhere. And you got to watch a judge show. Judy, Joe Brown, Mathis, don't matter. The Price is
Or
Right,
some daytime talk show. Or some
or The
daytime
Price
talk
is
show.
Right. Daytime
Mm-hmm.
talk show, daytime game show. I'll
Mm-hmm.
take The Bold and the Beautiful or The Young and the Restless as constellations, but you have to sit down and watch something that you can't get on a streaming app like Hulu or Netflix or something. You got to go to your original basic channels for that while drinking the ginger ale slowly. Don't be drinking it all fast because it's medicine.
Don't be
It's
drinking.
not.
Yeah, don't be. You can't be chugging it.
I went
You
into a
can't be chugging
tangent,
it.
but I'm trying to tell people without health insurance how to survive, especially if you live in Ohio. So continue, but I want to put that out there for free.
Um, and this more of this information is gonna prove why y'all need to make sure you know how to move. Is
Yeah.
because a study conducted by Harvard School of Public Health highlights that African Americans are more likely to receive lower quality healthcare services, including
Mm.
treatments that are less effective than those given to white patients. Here's why this is important. It's more of a matter of life and death than we give it credit for, because data from the Ohio Department of Health shows that black Ohioans are less likely to receive recommended cancer screenings when compared to their white counterparts. So
Mm.
even doctors in Ohio ain't telling people that maybe you should go get that checked out just to be safe.
Bruh. And
They
preventative
ain't even
care
telling
is
niggas that.
the tiebreaker. Preventative care is a tiebreaker.
Preventative
That's why
care.
there's so much push on making some types of clinics and you know what I'm saying, some types of stopgaps available to people even without health insurance because once you figure out you is there and you ain't got it, what do you do besides accept in a lot of cases a death sentence, right? So there's a lot of pushes to try to get people that preliminary access, but it's a no go from that angle too. It sounds like.
It's it. I mean, I'm telling you, when we look at it even closer, we got a study that acknowledged that improvements have been made when it comes to equity with Black Ohioans, and this was an article in the Ohio Capital Journal that spoke to
Mm-hmm.
this article. But let me get this over here so we all can see it here. Here we go. The study acknowledged improvements that have been made when it comes to equity with Black Ohioans, seeing a 33% decrease in unemployment between 2012 and 2021, and a 16% decrease in child poverty for the group as well. So usually with liberal politicians, you see some effort to fix things, but what happens when you lift up the hood? Disparities remain. And the
Mm-hmm.
HPIO's equity profile concluded that Black Ohioans are treated 10.3 times worse. This is where it gets sad though, because we talked about it 10.3 times worse. We talked about the severe housing cost burden, but it's the 3 times more infant mortality that hurts me, because we talking about black babies,
Mm-hmm.
and due to poverty and the inability for us to have the same type of healthcare or to even be treated the same way. You can't tell me black people in Ohio don't receive the same health and then look at the fact that black babies don't survive as much and connect the dots.
Yeah.
You got people that's gonna complain about abortion but don't care about the mortality rates of infants. These are babies that are wanted, people. These are
Yeah.
babies that we had there. We trying to keep it, but the
Come on.
mortality rate for black babies in Ohio is 3 times 3 times worse than it is for white babies. Does that make sense?
You know?
Exactly. And so, lastly, we're gonna look at, of course, what is this? What are we looking at? Incarceration rates in Ohio. Yeah, 43%. We only make up 14% of the population.
Y'all do that math.
43%, but we only make up 14% of the population. Right. And then when you look at the white population, 50%, but they make up 79% of the population. So we are 43% of the incarcerated population, while white people make up 79% of the entire population. Help us help that make sense. We ain't even 20% of the population in Ohio, but we 43% of the people that's locked up.
Okay.
So, we almost done. This is where we start to get tricky. This is where we start to get tricky because we got a handful, a buckshot that we gonna throw at y'all real quick.
Wow.
Because as we move, Ohio was number 3 on the list. As we look, we almost done. We get to number 2 on the list. Number 2 on the list shouldn't be any surprise. Now I know y'all been sitting there thinking,
like what,
bro? Where is Alabama? Where's Georgia? Where's Mississippi? I mean, that's what I would be thinking. If any list, I'm looking for all of them states, right?
Yeah.
Here's the thing about that. The best way for us to have this conversation is to not even play no games. We shouldn't make a whole list about this region because there's other places that we need to talk about. But we need to include this region. And the way that we're going to include it, you know, we're going to do it. We just going to call it the Deep South. Number 2 on the list is the entirety of the Deep South. That includes Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina. Deep South. Now, how our litmus test that we've used is CRT and abortions. Right? No. In the Deep South, 3 out of 5 states have critical race theory bans. 3 out of 5. 2 out of 5 are consider them. So critical race theory is not something that's protected in terms of these states, right? Mm-hmm. I gotta get our abortion number though. I gotta get our abortion is because I had it pulled up, but I guess I didn't write it down. Abortion, because we gotta see. I mean, because I wouldn't be surprised. Mm-hmm. But we definitely can't leave them out of there. So if we look at abortion bans by state, let me go ahead and pull it up so we can all look and see at the Deep South as a whole. What do we have here? Oh, that looks terrible, just like we thought. Dark red never means anything good ever. Yeah. So let's take a look at it. We can cut all that side of the country off. We only care about this group here. So Deep South, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina. South Carolina has some restrictions, some protections, right? It's in the orange area, so it's not as bad. Or yellow. Let me say, what's that? Goldenrod. Goldenrod. Georgia is orange. That means that they're very restrictive. It means that while that there are some bans there are some exceptions, right? But there are a lot of bans there. Y'all see this shit here? Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, they not playing no games. This shit is banned all the way. Like y'all, this shit is banned all the way. They're not fucking with it. So do y'all see? This helps us understand why we group this whole. Because what's the point of talking about Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina separate?
Wasting everybody's time. All they doing is piggybacking off each other, and almost I feel like they're in a competition trying to see who can outdo each other, just being more terrible to their citizens. That's be our mind.
Right, who's more terrible today black population? Now check this out.
I don't know what the fuck I just said, but neither here nor there. Yeah,
I heard you.
I was like, I don't know how that came out, but here or there, here nor there.
So we know 3 states have straight critical race theory bans. 2 states are considering them, and then 3 states have straight abortion bans. Then 2 other states are a little bit looser, even though they're still abortion. So women's reproduction rights. So let me not say abortions because that is very It's very reductive. But again, the reason why we're using abortions to talk about this conversation is because it helps us understand the state's relationship with women's reproductive rights as a whole. So we know that in the Deep South, guess what? Women's reproductive rights are not protected. Sorry, that's the reality. What we know about the deep
People. Let's also be clear. People's reproductive rights.
what
We need to
peoples,
make sure
peoples.
we talk about the fact that there are not just women out here having babies, and it's already hard being queer in the South. So don't let your ass be queer and be out here trying to be pregnant and have a baby. You're doing too much now,
Yes,
and
yes. Hey, and
you be
if
subject to
if that pisses you off, so what? We're
oh
inclusive.
well,
Fuck you.
huh? Be
Right?
mad. Also, before
We're
you jump
inclusive.
back
Let me
in,
say this. Let me say this. We're
mhm,
inclusive to everybody that's inclusive. We exclude, are biased, got beef with everybody that is producing oppression, inequality, and inequity to other groups of people in this country. We have beef with. There's a bias to you type of people. Go ahead, Toy.
Hood therapy said we was cute. I just wanted to acknowledge that because I agree. Thank you so much.
Hey, I
It
try.
means
I
a lot.
try.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
try. I try.
Carry on. The South.
The South, right? No, to be clear, the Deep South, because Texas people
Mhm.
start getting weird because they consider themselves the South too. But we talking about the Deep South in this instance. Black history and women's reproductive rights are not safe there. Let's get into the data. The first thing that we want to point out is that the South is a representation of cultural anti-blackness. God damn it, if we talking about where anti-blackness found its home, when we talking
Yeah.
about where anti-blackness found its voice, where anti-blackness was able to establish itself as a core part of how this country operates, God damn it did it in the South.
Yeah.
God damn it, I'm not. uh,
Absolutely.
Donnell in the chat said, as a Louisianian, I'm not surprised the South is the most restricted, as also the highest concentration of black people in the country. Yes. Yes, and that's why we couldn't. That's why we had to group the South, Donnell, because when we're talking about states that are dangerous for black people, a part of our rubric was the concentration of black people here. Shout out to Chris MVP Harris, who just joined the conversation. We're
Yeah.
talking about black people, or the where black people are concentrated. So if you got a messed up culture, messed up socioeconomics, messed up politics, and then there's a lot of black people there, we got a problem.
Yeah.
Right, because it's a lot of black people experiencing this messed up nonsense. But let's get into it. According to a report by the Anti-Defamation League, the number of white supremacist propaganda incidents in the United States skyrocketed by 59% between 2018 and 2019. Yo, what do we call that? Trump era. We call that the Trump effect. Okay,
1000%.
we've talked about this on past episodes. We literally got a whole episode about the radicalization of white nationalist extremists, and it has to do with the Trump effect. So between 2018 and 2019, we saw the skyrocket in white supremacist propaganda, and the bulk of that propaganda was concentrated in the South. That means that over 60% of that was concentrated in the South. To continue, a 2019 study by the National Memorial of Peace and Justice found that 68% of all known lynchings in the United States between 1889 and 1918 occurred in Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, and Virginia. That means that our ancestors, in our genes, if y'all know what epigenetics is, that y'all know that trauma that our ancestors experienced is passed down to our genes. We are genetically predisposed to have aversions to all the states we just listed. Specifically talking about the Deep South. I'm gonna tell you, I told people at a young age, I'm cool with traveling everywhere in the United States. I don't want to take my ass to the Deep South. Niggas was like, Atlanta is the black capital, Atlanta. Yes. Step one foot outside of Atlanta. Where are you? You back on
New
like
Orleans,
you
and that's the thing. A lot of examples end up being cherry picked. New Orleans is another great example. And then these places are great, right? But there is a level of fear that I think probably goes back to, I mean, before, but it's definitely reflected in things like Emmett Till, where you go down there and you break a rule you don't even know about. You know what I'm saying? Or you know what I mean? You look at the Ahmaud Arbery's, it's like exercising. I just want to go on a nice piece of dog, don't want to bother nobody, don't want to hurt nobody, and all of a sudden I'm being subject to the law of the land. It ain't even the law of the state, but the state is also justifying that the law of the land rules out. And if you feel like I was on your land or in your space or in your place, or I whistled wrong or did something and walked in there, whatever, I could be subject to some bullshit. You know what I'm saying?
I
So
could be
like,
subject to some bullshit.
and it's similar to, Missouri. Like I really speak from experience because I know I'm privileged when it comes to being from Kansas City and being a Kansas City girl. I rep that hard, but I know that I come with
Yeah.
some baggage. My state is not shit. outside of Kansas City, St. Louis, and yeah, turn the cap around definitely. And what
Kansas City,
Columbia?
Jeff City. Well, yes, Kansas City, St. Louis. Is it Jeff City or Columbia?
I say
It's more.
Como is probably a little bit more integrated than Jeff City is, but Jeff City is also where LU is, where it's the
Yeah, because I was about to say
ACC.
it got the school, so that's why I would say Jeff City probably had more niggas.
I
Yeah.
don't. I'm not trying to be in the mix in my own state, dog. I'm not about to just be like go exploring Missouri for the hell of it. I might go to the Lake of the Ozarks or Branson or
Oh,
something.
and the Lake of the Ozarks is the worst.
But you
Yo,
know,
the lake it's fun. It's a kick it
it's weird.
spot, but it is a hotbed for white nationalism. The Lake of the Ozarks, a great place to vacation if it's a lot of black people with you. That's
Exactly. But
not a
I'm
place
not.
that. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't even want to get off into Missouri though. Like
Oh,
I was using
right.
that
Because
as
it's
an
not on the
example of
list.
the fact that because we'll end up talking about Missouri all day long. It's just the fact that going to the South puts you in a position where you might feel comfortable and feel safe until you end up with a very rude awakening that you are in the South, baby. You in the deep South, baby, and that ain't how it move out here, right? And
Right.
so I've been very interested in the development of places like not just Atlanta, but even places outside of the outskirts of it. Because how far do the outskirts go? Like what Shorty came out with a song that's like, what she say?
Some is not
Now this
Atlanta.
part is not Atlanta. This part
Yeah.
is not, and I'm like, okay, these parts are not Atlanta, but am I cool? Am I okay if I go there? Like, at what point? What's the radius of protection before I start not being safe? And those are the same questions we have to ask. Excuse me, probably outside of Baton Rouge and like I said, New Orleans, and shit, Charlottesville, and what are some other places in Birmingham, and just different places,
Hmm.
Jackson, right? When I get outside of those places, what are we really starting to deal with here?
A
And
lot.
I'm scared to find out.
A
I'm
lot.
a little afraid.
I mean, but in terms of the cultural anti-blackness, according to a study by the Economic Innovation Group, the Deep South is home to 5 of the top 10 most unequal states in the United States. So the reason why we shouldn't have listed these out, because if we want to talk about segregation, ain't no point in talking about Ohio. The worst segregation is in Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, Louisiana. Ain't no point in
Yeah,
talking about no other state. The reason why we wanted to list all of these is because we know what's up. We know what's up with these places. We can't be
yeah, I love
convinced
it. I
that,
ain't saying
yeah, right. Like there's no point in us getting caught up in just listing the five, like these southern states as the places to not go. When this whole region, I mean, yeah, you got your pockets, you got your Atlantas, you got your Jacksons, these places where black people are. But Jackson, Mississippi, is the poorest place in the United States. Poverty
Mhm.
is ridiculous there.
I mean, and it's no coincidence that any or all these states are ranking in the top. I mean, I'm sorry, in the bottom, probably 10 states for education.
All of
Right.
them.
Mississippi always comes in dead last every year. They come last in everything. But um
In everything.
I mean, it's no tea, no shade to anybody listening from Mississippi from the ship, but it's just bad business out there, though. Like Donnell says, that's true too. The black enclaves in the South are breathtaking, but stepping into predominantly white spaces can be breathtaking too, in a more literal sense. Feels like walking a tightrope. And I can only imagine. I know it's cracks and crevices of places like Atlanta or places like Jackson where you better
Hmm.
cash. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, it's just,
I mean, yeah, because
hell.
at the same time, like as niggas, right? Like I'm from Kansas City. I don't just go on any block. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Like,
Like,
oh, you'll just move indiscriminately, even in Kansas City. So you got to watch where you going with niggas. But in places in the deep South, if niggas will rob you, yeah, all of that other shit. The sundown town ain't a thing out there.
yeah.
That's regular. Like, you better not get your ass caught on one of them highways. Yeah, in the Georgia, in the Georgia country, because who knows if anybody gonna see your ass again,
Yeah, man.
and that's real. And so, actually, I want to look at. Of course, we want to look at the the incarceration rates. But a few things we got to point out. First, when it comes to the cultural anti-blackness in Georgia, we got to remember that there is a report by the Southern Poverty Law Center that found that black individuals in the Deep South are often subjected to excessive force, racial profiling, and other forms of discrimination by law enforcement. The thing that, because we've talked about this with other places in the South, but what y'all got to remember is that they learned it from the Deep South. Everywhere else where we talked about the ways that people were segregated and then policed, they learned it from these different states in the Deep South. Now, I'm not trying to be unfair, right? I'm not trying to be unfair. But I think we'd be fooling ourselves. We be playing a game. The name Deep South literally stems from referring to states that relied on the slave labor to establish their aristocracy, their culture, as well as their economic foundation.
Right.
To be clear, before we talk about, we almost done too. We almost done. How long we been on here?
Quite some time now.
Oh, it's an hour and 40 minutes. We've been cooking. So let's get this cleared up quick so we can get y'all up out of here. We appreciate y'all. Outside of the culture of anti-blackness that we find in the Deep South, we got to talk about gerrymandering, because that's actually what's even in the news more so now because of what's going on in actual Alabama. Now, what we see happening is, in a 5-4 decision released Thursday, the Supreme Court upheld a key section of the Voting Rights Act as they found that a congressional map drawn by Alabama's Republican-controlled legislature after the 2020 census diluted the power of black voters in a state where 1 in 4 residents was black. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we know that gerrymandering operates to be counterproductive. We know Alabama has a huge problem with that. What we also know is that 56% of the voters in Alabama's majority black 7th congressional district had their polling places closed after 2013, right, when they cut down the first parts of the Voting Rights Act. Again, in Mississippi, despite the fact that black people make up 37% of the population, they hold only one of the 4 congressional seats of the 122 seats in the legislature. So in all these positions of power, all of these black people are not only underrepresented, right, but there are efforts to make sure that they aren't able to vote. According to a report by the Brenner Center of Justice, in the 2018 midterms, more than 1.6 million voters' preferences were diluted due to gerrymandering in 7 states, including Alabama and Georgia. Okay? So we know how they get down in terms of gerrymandering. They're robbing and denying black people the right to vote. And so to cap off the Deep South in terms of the issues of why we should avoid the Deep South and why it's dangerous for black people, the travel advisory for there, it's very obvious. Let's look at the disparities in incarceration in the Deep South. In Louisiana, 66% of their population is imprisoned for black people. Black people make up 34% of the population. They are 66% of the population of imprisoned. Well more than half. To push it even further, Louisiana has more people in prison than anywhere else in the world.
Come on.
Okay.
In el mundo.
In the world. Louisiana is locking more niggas up than anybody else. Let's look at Alabama. Alabama, 53% of their population, of the black or of the incarcerated population is black. Let's take a look at Georgia. At Georgia, will it be less than 50%? Of course not. It'll be about 60% too.
Jesus.
Right? Let's take a look at South Carolina. South Carolina? What's that? Is it less than 50%? No, 59%. Right? Jesus. The highest that we had seen up until this point was 59% or 55% that we saw in Illinois. You go to the Deep South, they like hold my beer.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Making it ain't seen Nathan. Right? So when we talk about the reemergence of the system of slavery that we saw in the South, all they did was just say, "Cool, we know what happened." Um, in terms of the amendments that said that, yeah, we free, but what? Y'all free, and you can't be enslaved, but what?
Yeah.
Incarceration. And so there's there's no confusion, right, as to why we see such high disparities in incarceration rates in the South as opposed to everywhere else. 59. We looked at 55% and was like, oh my, or 53% and was like, oh my God.
It always gets worse.
Louisiana has more people locked up than anywhere else in the world. Okay, moving on
Now, you about to move to the number one?
to the number one spot.
Before you do that, I actually want to shout out LaRon, who's been dropping some little factoids all about Louisiana in the chat. The leader of the Klan came from Louisiana. Any Louisiana folk in the chat remember the anti-sagging law. I remember one, probably didn't even place it in Louisiana, but I remember there being talks and conversations of literal legislation against people being able to sag. So that's crazy.
I remember that too.
Louisiana, one of the first places enslaved people went, mostly New Orleans. So we know that was definitely a port city for people getting dropped off in the slave trade and making that matriculation over in the South. So a lot of interesting stuff. Shout out to Steve Cole. Shout out to who else popped in here and said what's up? Emmanuel Briggs. All y'all that have slid in the last part of this conversation. Jaleesa, you had mentioned something in the chat. So this next one is actually gonna go out to you. Go ahead and slide to the number one state that we are adding to the travel advisory list and telling
The
black
chop
folks
book.
that looking around if you go out here. What's the number one state?
All right, and this is no disrespect because I got a lot of people I love that are from this state.
A
A lot of
ton.
people I love.
We used to have one here around this bad boy on a regular basis.
Yeah, on
My
a
lord.
regular basis. But hey, the number one state outside of Florida is the dependent variable to control.
Yeah.
Outside of Florida, the only state competing with the worst for Florida.
We should ask the chat real quick before you say it. Chat, do y'all already know what it is? If y'all know what this state is, go ahead and drop it in the chat real quick. Let's see how quick your Twitter fingers is. What state haven't we named that is despicable in the face of Black lives and the way that they exist in that state? Real quick. We already on the edge of our seat. Can y'all go to the chat and tell us what's missing?
While we waiting on y'all to go to the chat and tell us what's missing, y'all make sure y'all hit that like button. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. If you have not found us on Spotify, make sure y'all follow us on Spotify to check the audio playback if you weren't able to check the whole conversation. What else? Follow me at The Political Plug, because again, tell us what y'all think is number one on the list. Follow me at The Political Plug. We just dropped the video talking about voting and all of that, because we're going hard this election season. We got some in the chat, Toya. So Hood Therapy said Texas. Alexis Anderson said Texas. Emmanuel Briggs said Texas. Steve Cole said Texas. Winter Dragon said Texas. Well, god damn it. Hey, y'all tapped in, because number one on this list is good old Texas.
In the words of Donnell.
Tejas.
What they call the great state.
Oh boy, the great state of Texas. Well, let's talk about how great it is as we get y'all out of here. First, the first issue that we facing, and I love y'all. Like, shout out to Consciously, Bryan, Texas native. Shout out to my wife, Dallas, Texas native. You know what I'm saying? I got, like, Houston is like home for me. My partners, two of my best friends, are from born and raised in Houston, Texas. But god damn it, y'all deal with some shit. Let's get it started so we can get y'all out of here. Texas is number one first because, similar to the Deep South, they engage in cultural anti-blackness. It's a part of who they are. Let's not forget.
Wait. Before we even get there, and I didn't mean to untangle your shit, but the two standards that we've set for every state that we talked about is CRT and abortion. So I just want to make sure we're clear. Anybody was curious about how they stand for those two issues? The plug. I want for the sake of symmetry, for the sake of continuity.
Thank you, Toya. So we've talked about CRT bans and abortion bans for every state to let us know it's the litmus test. How does this state feel about black people overtly? How does it feel about women's rights overtly? Texas is one of the few states on the list outside of the states in the Deep South that individually has a critical race theory ban successfully and has successfully banned abortions.
Got it out of here.
Clearly don't fool with niggas. Clearly don't fool with women's reproductive rights. So let's explain what that looks like. Let's get into the cultural anti-blackness of this is a long guy. I didn't even know we had been rocking this long.
We've been rocking and rolling. And rolling. Hello?
Rocking and rolling. Correct. So the cultural anti-blackness in Texas talk about a few things. We in the month of June, correct?
Mm-hmm.
What do we celebrate? What do black people celebrate in June?
Well, which black people? Because I almost was like this, but then I also was like,
well, what holiday? What holiday is important to black people in the state in the month of June?
The answer is Juneteenth.
Juneteenth.
Yeah. I get excited for a lot of reasons in June, so I had to be sure about which one you was talking about.
Right. For woke niggas. For woke niggas. Let's say Juneteenth. Right, because it's a few. Right, there's a few. There's a few. I got you. There's a few. Shout out to everybody celebrating Pride.
Yeah.
Shout out to everybody celebrating Pride.
Me. Absolutely.
Yeah. Right.
Me and my people. Right. Hello. It's good to see
you. Right.
Our mom.
But let's be clear. Texas was the last Confederate state to surrender during the Civil War, and the effects of slavery and segregation have continued to impact the lives of black Texans. That's why we have Juneteenth, because somebody had to pull up on the plantations in Texas and be like, hey, y'all know y'all free, right? Like you don't have to stay. Like we can help y'all get up out of here. That's how we got Juneteenth, because niggas into white folk in Texas like, we don't care what Washington says, goddamn it, we keeping our slaves. In the late 1800s and the early 1900s, Texas was a hotbed, what they call a hotbed, it was a kick it spot, as us black folk call, for Ku Klux Klan activity and racially motivated violence. As per a 2020 report by National Partnership for Women and Families, Texas has the second worst maternal mortality rate in the country, which disproportionately affects whom?
Black women.
To be clear.
Black birthing people.
To be clear. A 2021 report by the Brookings Institute institution explained how black people in Texas are more than twice as likely to live in poverty as white people. The report also found that black poverty rate in Texas is one of the highest in the country. One of the highest. As well as having one of the worst governors in the country and one of the worst senators in the country. Ted Cruz is a piece of shit in every way, shape, or form. I don't even have, because we, and I was about to get to Abbott, but we don't have enough time to talk about all the bullshit that Ted Cruz and Greg Abbott has been a part of. But we can look at their efforts on CRT and abortions to help you fully understand how they feel about black people, specifically black women. Right, Ted Cruz is one of the biggest people that came out against CRT, complaining that it made white kids feel bad, and we shouldn't have education and make white kids feel bad. But it is what it is. So that's the cultural anti-blackness that we see in the state of Texas. In crime and punishment, many studies have shown that African Americans are disproportionately targeted and unfairly treated by the police in Texas. For example, a study at the ACLU of African Americans in Texas are 2.8 times more likely to be arrested for weed compared to their white counterparts, despite similar usage rates. So we know white people smoke at least as much weed as black people and still don't get arrested as much as black people do. Let's also, I know we hear it's a few more because it's bad. An analysis by the Texas Tribune found that between 2010 and 2016, more than 70% of the people who died in Texas police custody were minors.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Between 2010 and 2016, 70% were minors. And guess who were overrepresented in that data?
Black ones.
Black people. Exactly. So Lastly, let's take a or before we get into that last part, and which is education. But the last part we want to point out in terms of the law and order, or law enforcement, ain't necessarily
Mm.
order, but enforcement in Texas. Let's take a look at their incarceration rates. Not as bad. Not as bad as the Deep South. Not as bad as the Deep South. 33% to 13%. Not as bad. It's still ridiculous.
I think, and I would want to, because I feel like I've come across statistical data or information to talk about the disproportionate lengths
Mm,
of jail time. So
right.
while you might not have more people per capita going to prison in the state of Texas, I know that there are disproportionate sentencing that happens there that gives Black people a longer time in jail for the same crimes as
Hmm.
their counterparts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so how it's also black people are most affected by the bail system too. Black people are disproportionately or pretty much are the report shows black people are twice as likely to be held in pretrial detention than white
Hmm.
people. As a result, they're more likely to lose their jobs, they're more likely to lose their home, and it's possible that they're more likely to lose their children because they are less likely to receive bail or able to afford bail in those circumstances. The last thing that we're going to talk about in terms of Texas and about how it's a terrible place outside, or let me not say terrible place to not disrespect my Texas.
Your
It's too many
Texas
Texas
people.
people I mess with, and there are. I love black people in Texas. I do. Like I like Houston is one of my favorite places to visit. But to be clear, we're talking about the dangers associated with traveling, and I know firsthand. Trust me. Like I've been pulled over for frivolous shit. I've been, you know what I'm saying, set aside for frivolous shit. I've dealt with frivolous law enforcement in the state of Texas, and I also figured out how to move. But the last thing I want to point out in terms of the state of Texas is how it relates to our kids and education. Because as much as they trying to tell us to be mad about CRT, or how much they're mad about CRT and how they talk about, kids don't need to be learning that information.
Yeah.
Like if we take a look, what we'll see is that when it comes to education, black kids got it the worst. Period. Let's just look at all the basic data. There are 690,000, or there were 690,999, or 690,999 black students.
Bro, you don't just say 700,000 Black students.
I wanted to say it right, goddammit. I
It
wanted to
wasn't
say it
syllable
right. I wanted
that
to say it right. Let's take a look at risk factors. Risk factors. Students identified as being risk or of dropping out of school based on state-defined criteria. Let's see who is the most at risk. Who is the most at risk? That's black students. All right. 4-year graduation rates. Black students 86.3, white students 93.8. Okay. Okay. It's a drop off, right? Because of all the circumstances that we talked about, but it's close, right? But let's look at the dropout rates. 3.5% of African American students drop out compared to 1.3 white students. We got an issue with education here.
Absolutely.
Chronic absenteeism in Texas schools. This is last year, 2021 to 2022. Chronic absenteeism in Texas schools. Black students are absent 20%, or make up 20% of students who exhibit chronic absenteeism. White students only 10. We double our students are missing school for reasons that got to do with their socioeconomic backgrounds,
Crazy.
for reasons that got to do with their environment. College readiness. 13% of African American students are taking advanced placement classes. 24% of white students. Okay? And performing well in these classes, only 29% are performing well. 61% of white students are performing at a higher rate than African American students. Okay, so what we see here is while they're trying to complain to you and tell you that students are being or white students are being brainwashed, or their feelings are being hurt because they're learning about critical race theory education. But what about the black students whose home and neighborhood
Come
environments
on.
are getting in the way of their ability to take advantage of the same resources? The same resources. We ain't even gonna talk about the segregation in Texas because it's in the South, so we know that it's there, right? So we know that that's what we see in these numbers. We know we see majority black schools who lack the same resources, who lack the same intent, who lack the same investment in their schools. But y'all want to talk to us about critical race theory and how that's a problem in schools. But our students are not learning.
Right.
Right? So Texas sits at the top of our list thanks to one, the culture of anti-blackness that not only did it exhibit on its own during chattel slavery, after chattel slavery, but also its attempt to imitate an out conservative and out alt right Florida. You know what I mean? As well as
Yeah.
the crime and punishment, right? And the failure in education that we see in Texas that pretty much positions it as one of the most dangerous, one of the worst states for black people to be traveling to and through. Now, to be
Put therapy
clear,
said making Cleveland look real nice.
hey, it made Cleveland, it did. It made Cleveland look a lot better. Y'all wasn't at the top.
Yeah.
And so the reason why we having this conversation again is because if anybody's gonna be saying we will give the NAACP their credit. There's nothing wrong with identifying places that is dangerous for black people to travel to. But to be clear, we need to one, expand the list and then broaden our understanding of why these places are dangerous to travel to. Remember, we see
Yeah.
massive segregation, right? Massive racial profiling, right? Black people are denied homes. They're being pushed out of their homes. These are not safe environments to raise families. These are not safe communities, even though policies may be safe, the politicians may be safer, but at the same time, we're literally seeing the same outcome that we see in the Deep South, even if the numbers don't match.
Yeah.
Right. So it's important that y'all that we continue these conversations. Y'all see, right? This is the chop book. Right, the chop up green book, a guide to understanding dangerous areas, the most dangerous states in the United States for black people. Go ahead, Toya.
Quick
Chime
review
in
of the
before we get
top
out of here.
six. We started off with Connecticut at number six. We then slid over to Illinois at number five. We supposed no, correct.
Minnesota. Minnesota.
Minnesota, yes. Okay, so number six was Connecticut. Number five was Minnesota. Number four was Illinois. Number three was Ohio. Number two, don't get it twisted, we ain't no fools. It was the entire South. This includes South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. And then am I missing a state?
Nah, that was all five of them.
And then the number one state then that we have suggested to put on the chop book. Watch your head, watch yourself, watch your neck, watch your body, watch your front, and watch your back if you're going to the state of Texas. So that really is our entire list. Hopefully, y'all, if you came in toward the end of it, go listen to the top of the conversation where we really kind of break down A, if you're not familiar with what a green book is, what a green book is, B, what Florida did to really set the tone for us to want to expand this conversation out, and C, some of the surprising states that ended up on the list, like your Connecticut's, like your Minnesota's, like your Illinois, that you might not automatically think of, but that are some of the worst places to be for a litany of reasons if you are a black person in this country. So stay connected and stay tuned. Please believe too, if we look to next week, I know I'm gonna be traveling next Thursday. So just like this week, the same way the conversation was a little free floaty, but y'all knew we was coming. Be look out for that same thing. Juneteenth is next Monday, so you know we're excited about that. Make sure you paying attention in your own city. Figure out what they're doing for Juneteenth out there. Figure out where the black folks are to be at. Figure out where they collectivizing so that Sunday, June 18th is Father's Day. So you get your black father, you take him to the black Juneteenth celebration. Y'all do some connecting, y'all do something like that. And also, too, next Sunday, if you think about it, if it crosses your mind, next Sunday, June the 18th, here in our Lord 2023. Send me a birthday shout out. Let me know happy birthday. Tell me something.
Yes. Happy birthday.
It's Gemini season all day long. I'm not flipping y'all off when I show y'all how we moving out here. But the birthday time is coming up, so y'all get ready because June is like I think Donnell pointed out, is Black Music Month. So if you're not getting into black music, listening to all music, which in some way, shape, or form or fashion comes back to black people, but get you some black music knowledge in. Listen to something good that nourishes your spirit and your soul. And get ready to celebrate each other. Hopefully, y'all been out there at them Pride celebrations. I've been doing my little Pride thing this weekend a little bit. But this is a time, where we're having meaningful, hearty, healthy conversations we want you to share with folk. We thank y'all for sitting here and laboring and tearing with us as we go through the things that we think are
Two
important.
hours, boy. I ain't even realize we was cooking that long.
Listen.
But yeah,
But this is what
shoot.
happened when you chilling with family. This is summertime chill time. You know what I'm saying? When things will slow down a little bit more relaxed. So shout out
Mm.
to y'all for popping in with us. Winter Dragon, Hood Therapy, a bunch of different people in the comments. C Dot, just a bunch of people who've been loving on us. LaRon, Chris, Alexis, shoot, who else? Emmanuel, Steve. I like to call y'all out by name because we don't take advantage of the fact or just assume that we deserve y'all's attention, y'all time. Y'all see the thing, y'all hit the bell, y'all notified, y'all subscribed, and y'all pop up and y'all show up every time. So we love y'all and we appreciate y'all a lot.
Right. The last thing I'm gonna say before we get up out of here is I finally found Toya my so I'm 35. So around my age, niggas start going through midlife crisis. I think it's like 35, right? Niggas start going through
Somewhere
midlife
up in there, I
crisis
think is when it starts to
between
start.
35 and
30,
40.
35 and
Yeah.
45, something like that.
I found my midlife crisis hobby.
Magic.
All right. On that note, uh, I'm not even gonna deal with it. And I don't push the button to leave in the show. So I'm gonna just implore the plug to put a pin in the magic show for today. Practice, nigga. And then come and bring us back some Chris Angel esque nigga magic
Nah,
here
I've been working
after
on some tricks, right? Nah, I've been working on some tricks. So what y'all gonna see is y'all gonna see a plethora of or I already gonna say a plethora, they gonna be too much. I'm gonna start doing some magic content on the Instagram and see if people see if people fuck with the plug doing card tricks. We gonna see. Hey, we appreciate y'all joining this, man. Sitting here rocking out. J Universe popped up at the end.
Hey,
Definitely
love.
good to see you part of it. Emmanuel Briggs, thanks for the love. We appreciate y'all, and we
Thank
will see
y'all.
y'all next time. We out.
Peace.